She is no longer here. A dramatic narrative narrated in the first person by Adele Fontaine. Part 1, The Notebook. I kept a notebook for 3 years. Not a diary in the theatrical sense, not the elaborate journaling of someone who is performing the act of reflection. A small notebook with a dark green cover that I bought at a stationery shop on the Rue de Rivoli, the kind of shop that sells beautiful objects to people who are going to put them to ordinary use. I used it for the specific purpose of writing things I could not say out loud, which is a purpose that has probably sustained the stationery industry since the industry began. His name is in it 347 times. I counted once in the spring of our final year at the lycée, sitting in the library on a Tuesday afternoon, with the specific focused attention of someone who is trying to understand the dimensions of something they are inside. 347 mentions across 3 years of a notebook that I carried everywhere, that I wrote in at night in my room and occasionally during lunch in a corner of the school garden, that I had brought with me to every city I had subsequently lived in. 3 years of secondary school, 3 years of watching him from the desk, 2 rows behind, and to the left, the specific position I had arrived at through the accumulated small decisions of a person who is trying to be near something they cannot have while maintaining the form of not trying. He was always at the front. He was always there before I arrived. He was the kind of person who occupies a space before he has done anything in it, the quality of presence that certain people carry without performing. His name is Emile Voss. He grew up in the 8th arrondissement of Paris, the son of a judge and an architect, which is the specific origin story of a person who has been given both discipline and beauty, and who has organized these inheritances into something that is genuinely remarkable without being aware that it is. He was the best student in our year and probably in the decade of the lycée, which I know not from objective assessment, but from the assessment of every teacher who taught us a quality I verified repeatedly in the way I verified everything related to him obsessively and without acknowledging the obsession to anyone. He was not arrogant. This was the specific quality that made him impossible to dismiss the quality that would have been available to me if he had been arrogant. He was simply present in the way of someone who has decided that the world deserves their attention and is therefore attending. He argued in class with the same focused patience he brought to everything else. He was quiet in social settings without being cold, the quiet of someone who is comfortable in their own company rather than afraid of everyone else's. I never told him. Not in 3 years, not once. I wrote about him 347 times and I spoke to him perhaps 30, the accumulation of small exchanges that happen between people who sit in the same room 5 days a week for 3 years and who have not been friends and have not been enemies and have occupied for both of them the category of someone the other is aware of without having decided what to do with the awareness. I wrote the last entry in the notebook the night before the results of the baccalaureate were published. I had done well. I knew I had done well with the specific certainty of a student who has prepared completely and who understands the system she is being tested within. The entry said, "Tomorrow the results come. After tomorrow, if they are what I expect, I am going to tell him." I had decided this 6 weeks before, not impulsively, with the specific, careful deliberation I brought to difficult things. I had reasoned my way to the conclusion that carrying the 3 years silently to a conclusion I could not control was the wrong approach, that the moment after the results was the only clean moment available before everyone dispersed into their separate futures, that the question was not whether I would be embarrassed. I would be embarrassed. The question was whether I could live with not having said it. The answer was no. The results came. They were what I expected. I went to find him. Part 2, what he said. He was standing near the entrance of the school building, the old stone entrance with the carved motto above the door that I had been walking under for 3 years. He was with 2 friends who had been his orbit since the first year. They were talking about universities, the specific absorbed conversation of people who have just been given their futures. I walked up to him. His friends registered my approach with the particular quality of attention that people use when an unexpected element is introduced into a familiar situation. He looked at me. I said, Emil, I need to tell you something. You do not have to respond in any particular way. I just need you to know. He said, all right. I said, I have been in love with you for 3 years. I know that is a strange thing to say in a school entrance 3 minutes after the results came out. But it is true, and I decided 6 weeks ago that I was going to say it. And if I do not say it now, I will never say it. I watched his face during this, not for the answer. I had not expected a specific answer, but because his face was the thing I had been reading for 3 years and I wanted to see what it did with this. It did something I did not expect, not discomfort, not the managed consideration of someone trying to find the kind thing to say. Something that was for a brief moment, open the specific openness of someone receiving something they were not prepared to receive, and who has not yet had time to prepare a response. Then he said, Adele, I need to tell you something. I waited. He said I was going to talk to you today. Before this, I was going to tell you that I had agreed to go to the same university as Isabeau and that we were together. Isabeau, his equivalent, the person in the class who occupied the same tier of academic and social presence that he did, brilliant and composed and beautiful in the way of people who have been given all the gifts and distributed them gracefully. Of course it was Isabeau. I had watched her for 3 years in the specific peripheral way you watch the person who is what you are not, who has what you cannot have. I said, I see. He said, I am sorry. I did not know. I said, of course you did not know. I did not tell anyone. He said, Adele. I said, please do not apologize. You did nothing wrong. I am glad I said it. I meant what I said when I said you do not have to respond in any particular way. I stepped back. I smiled. It was not a performance. It was the specific smile of someone who has been practicing composure for 3 years and who has it available when they need it. I said, congratulations on your results. I walked away. I walked to the end of the street, and then down the side street, and then to the small park on the Rue du Temple, where I had sometimes eaten lunch when I needed to be alone, and I sat on a bench and I looked at the plane trees, and I breathed until the breathing was the kind that does not have anything extra in it. Then I opened the notebook to the last entry, and I added below my previous note, I told him. He is with Isabeau. I smiled and I walked away, and I was not embarrassed. I was proud of myself. That was enough. I closed the notebook and put it in my bag and did not open it for a very long time. Part 3, University and After. I went to university in Lyon. Not the same university as Emile and Isabeau, who went to Sciences Po in Paris as everyone had expected they would. I studied mathematics and applied physics at the École Centrale de Lyon, which was the place I had chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with the work itself, the specific form of research I wanted to do. The department that was doing the most interesting things in the field I cared about. I was good at Lyon. This surprised me slightly, the specific surprise of a person who has been managing themselves carefully for a long time, and who expected the managing to feel like all their lives, and discovered that when the specific stimulus was removed, the management became something less effortful. I made friends easily, which I had not done at the lycée, where the social architecture had been fixed too early for me to navigate comfortably. I did good work. I was recognized for the work by people who knew the field. I opened the notebook once in the first year of university to read the last entry, and then I put it away again. I did not follow his life, not deliberately, not the way I had at the lycée. I heard things through mutual acquaintances, the occasional piece of information that makes its way through the network of people who were in the same year at school. He and Isabeau had stayed together through university. He was doing well, of course. He had gone into commercial law after Sciences Po, which was not the path I would have predicted for him, but which fit the specific fit of someone with his combination of intelligence and interpersonal precision. I got on with my life, genuinely, not as a performance of getting on with my life. I had the specific advantage of a person who has processed something completely, who has said the difficult thing and received the difficult answer and survived it, and who no longer needs to organize their inner life around the management of an unspoken feeling. There were other people, not many and not easily, because I have never been easy in the way that certain people are easy, the quick warmth and the natural sociability. I have always been the person in a room who is paying attention before being paid attention to, and this is not a quality that produces fast intimacy. But there were real relationships, genuine ones, and they taught me things about myself and about what I wanted that I could not have learned in the 3 years of the notebook. I came back to Paris 4 years after leaving. I had finished my doctorate. I had a research position at a private institute in the 14th arrondissement that did the kind of work I found specifically meaningful, the work that has real-world applications rather than only theoretical elegance. I was 26 years old, and I was by any reasonable assessment all right. I found a flat near the Buttes Chaumont with a small balcony that faced east and caught the morning light. I bought plants, which I had never done before because student accommodation does not lend itself to plants. I planted them on the balcony in terracotta pots and tended them with the specific daily attention of someone who has decided to be responsible for something living. In the spring of my return to Paris, I ran into Emile Voss in the produce section of the market on the Place de l'Igre. I recognized him immediately. He was recognizable in the way that certain people are recognizable, because the quality that distinguished them was not external and therefore has not changed with years. He looked older in the specific way of men who are more themselves at 26 than they were at 17. The face that has completed the settling into its own particular form. He looked up and saw me. He said, "Adele." I said, "Hello, Emile." We looked at each other for a moment across the fruit stall. He said, "It has been a long time." I said, "Almost 7 years." He said, "You are back in Paris." I said, "Yes, a research position at the Institut Laugier." He said, "Mathematics." I said, "Applied physics, some overlap." He said, "Of course." He looked at me with the quality I had stored from the lycée, the full attention, the kind that receives what is there rather than managing an impression. Then he said, "Would you have time for coffee?" I thought about it for what was probably 2 seconds and felt like longer. I said, "Yes." Part 4, the coffee and what followed. He told me about Isabeau in the coffee shop on the Rue de la Roquette, which was near neither of our places and which we had arrived at by the specific meandering navigation of 2 people who were talking while they walked and had not paid attention to where they were going. He said Isabeau and I separated 2 years ago. Not dramatically. It was the kind of separation that happens when 2 people have grown in ways that are not parallel and have been honest enough to acknowledge that the growing has taken them to different places. I said, "I am sorry." He said, "Thank you. I am not exactly." Or I am sorry, in the way you are sorry about something that was necessary. She is well. I see her occasionally through mutual friends. We are cordial. I said, "Good." He said, "I know why you are asking." I looked at him. He said, not with vanity, "You have always been the kind of person who asks about the people connected to the things that mattered to you. I remember that about you from school. You paid attention to everyone in the ecosystem of what you cared about." I said, "That is a specific observation." He said, "I have thought about what you said to me on the day of the results, more than you might expect." I said, "You do not need to tell me that." He said, "I want to. Not to reopen anything, just because it has been sitting with me and you are sitting across from me, and I would like you to know." I said, "Then tell me." He said, "I thought about it for a long time afterward, about the specific quality of what you said and how you said it. You were not asking for anything. You were not managing the situation toward a particular outcome. You were telling me something true because it was true and you had decided it deserved to be said." I found that remarkable. I still find it remarkable. I said, "I was also terrified." He said, "I know. It did not look like terror, but I could tell." I said, "You could tell." He said, "You were holding your bag very tightly with both hands." I looked at him. He said, "I noticed things about you. From school, I was not, I realize now, as unaware of you as I probably appeared to be." I said, "Emile." He said, yes. I said, this is a very unusual coffee. He said, yes, I know. I am sorry if it is uncomfortable. I said, it is not uncomfortable. It is surprising. He said, is it? I said, yes. I resolved the 3 years very thoroughly. I went to Lyon and I had a complete and productive life there, and I came back to Paris and I have a flat with plants on the balcony, and I no longer carry anything unresolved from the lycée. So this is surprising. He said, the plants are a nice detail. I said, I am serious. He said, I know. I am also serious. I am not suggesting anything. I am just telling you that it is good to see you and that the 7 years have not reduced what I noticed about you, whatever that is worth. I said, it is worth something. He said, good. We finished our coffee. We walked separately back to our respective parts of the city. I went home and tended my balcony plants and cooked dinner and went to bed at a reasonable hour and lay in the dark for a long time thinking about a person who had noticed my hands on a bag 7 years ago. Part 5, the second meeting. He called me 3 weeks after the coffee. Not texted, called. I noted this as a specific quality, the quality of someone who has decided to communicate directly rather than through the specific management of text messages. He said, I have tickets for the Philharmonic on Saturday. The program is Schumann and Brahms. I thought you might like it. I said, I do like Schumann. He said, I know. You wrote an essay about the Dichterliebe in our final year German class that I have thought about intermittently since. I said, you read that essay? He said, we all read each other's essays. It was the exercise. I said, most people skimmed them. He said, I did not skim yours. There was a silence. I said, all right, Saturday. He said, good. The concert was at the Philharmonie de Paris. We met at the entrance. He was early, which I had not expected, and which registered immediately the quality of someone who has taken something seriously enough to be punctual about it. He was wearing a dark coat and he looked in the October evening outside the Philharmonie like the specific version of himself that had been assembled in the years since school. More settled, more present in his own skin, the specific thing that 20s do to certain people. We listened to Schumann. I will not describe the concert except to say that the specific quality of sitting beside someone you have been recalibrating your understanding of in a space where speech is suspended for 2 hours, and the only available communication is the shared experience of the music is particular and revealing. You understand things about a person from how they listen. He listened with the same complete attention he gave to everything. He did not shift or check his phone or manage the evening. He was simply there. In the interval, he asked me about my work in the way that people ask about work, when they are genuinely curious, rather than performing interest, the questions that go past the surface description into the actual substance of what you do and why. I told him about the research, the specific problem I was working on, which involved modeling the behavior of certain materials under specific stress conditions, and why the problem interested me, which was the specific intersection of mathematical elegance and real-world application that I had organized my professional life around. He listened and asked specific questions, and his questions were good, which told me things about him. He walked me to the metro afterward. It was late, and the air had the specific Paris October quality, cool and slightly damp, and carrying the particular smell of a city that has been rained on recently and has absorbed the rain. At the entrance, he said, I would like to do this again. I said, so would I. He said, are you sure? I said, I am always sure when I say things. That was established at the lycée. He smiled, not the performed smile of a social situation, the real one, small and specific and surprised out of him. He said, good night, Adele. I said, good night, Emile. I went down into the metro and sat in the bright carriage all the way to my stop and walked home to my flat near the Buttes Chaumont and stood on my balcony for a moment in the October dark, looking at the street below and the lights in the windows of the buildings opposite. I thought about 7 years and a bench in a park and the closing of a notebook. I thought about what it means when something you have resolved completely turns out not to have been resolved, but only to have been waiting for the conditions that would make the resolution possible. I thought about morning light on a balcony with plants. I went inside and made tea and went to bed and slept well. Part 6, the headaches. The headaches began in November. I am telling you this now because I need to tell you the shape of what followed, and the shape of what followed was in large part determined by this fact, the fact of November, and what I understood November to contain. The first headache was on a Wednesday, not severe. The specific quality of a bad tension headache, the kind I had had during periods of intensive work since university, the kind that responded to paracetamol and sleep, and the removal of the immediate cause. I attributed it to the project deadline I was approaching, and I managed it in the way I always manage physical inconvenience, pragmatically and without giving it more attention than it required. The second was worse, also on a Wednesday 2 weeks later, different in quality. From the first, not the diffuse tension pain, but something more specific and more interior, a pressure that was not entirely like anything I had had before. I took paracetamol. I went to bed early. In the morning, it was largely gone. By December, there had been 4 of them. By January 6, in February, I went to a doctor. The doctor referred me to a specialist. The specialist scheduled imaging. The imaging was in March. I want to tell you about March in the way that truth requires. I sat in the specialist's office on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I listened to the specific language of a medical professional who has been trained to deliver a particular category of information with the clarity and the care that it deserves. And I received what she told me with the specific receptivity of a person who has always preferred the direct version. The word is glioblastoma. It is a word with its own specific weight, the weight of a thing that is both a medical term and a sentence, and the sentence is not one you negotiate. The specialist was careful and thorough, and she talked about treatment options and quality of life and timelines in the specific way of someone doing this work correctly. I listened. I asked specific questions. I thanked her. I left. I sat in my car in the parking structure beneath the hospital for a long time. Not crying, not in shock exactly. In the specific state of a person who has just received information they did not want to have, and who is doing the initial work of understanding what the information means for the decisions they now need to make. The decisions were not primarily medical. The medical decisions were straightforward, or as straightforward as they can be in a situation with a known and narrow range of outcomes. I would do the treatment. The treatment would buy time. The time would be what it was, and no negotiation would change the parameters. The decisions were about the people. I drove home. I sat on my balcony with my plants, which were coming back from winter, the specific green that appears when the cold has lifted and the light has returned, and the small things that have been waiting begin to take their opportunity. I looked at the plants and I thought about my mother, and I thought about Emile. I called my mother first. She drove from Bordeaux the next day and was in my flat before noon, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface in the specific way she had when she was managing something she could not fix, and I told her everything I had been told. She listened. She held my hands for a long time. Then she made lunch, and we ate it together and talked about practical things, the way my mother and I always eventually returned to practical things, because we are both people who find the practical a form of love. I did not call Emile. Not that day, not the next day. I thought about it for 2 weeks before I understood what I was going to do. Part 7, what I decided. I want to tell you the reasoning because it mattered to me and because I did not arrive at it carelessly. We had been seeing each other for 5 months. Not formally, in the way of people who have agreed to be in a relationship and have named it. In the way of people who have been occupying each other's evenings and weekends, with a frequency and a quality that has passed beyond the provisional into something with structure. The structure of 2 people who have organized their lives to include each other. I had been careful not to make demands. This is my nature, and it was also, I was aware, the specific quality that made our situation what it was. The absence of the pressure that might have resolved it into something named sooner, or kept it at the provisional level longer. I liked what we had. I believed he did too. The treatment was going to be harsh. Not immediately, not in the first months, but progressively. The quality of my life during the treatment was going to decline in ways that were specifically not what I wanted him to see, not because I was afraid of being seen, but because there is a specific category of witness that exists between two people in the early stages of something genuine. And the category of witness I was going to require was a different one, a deeper one, and I did not want to put that on someone who had only had 5 months to decide how much he wanted to be in my life. If I told him he would stay, I knew this about him. He was the kind of person who stays, who does not abandon, who has the specific code of a person raised by people who taught him that the way you treat someone in difficulty is the test of character. He would stay and he would be present, and the presence would become the relationship, and the relationship would be built on his staying rather than on his choosing, and I did not want that. I wanted him to choose. Not me, not the relationship, not the staying. I wanted him to choose freely with full information, because the quality of a choice made freely is the only quality that is real. So I was going to give him the full information. But first I needed to make sure that my presence in his life was not the reason he made the choice. I needed to create the conditions of a free decision. I called him on a Thursday in April. I told him in the specific, direct way I told him everything that I did not think we should see each other anymore. That the feelings I had been having were not evolving in the direction I had hoped, and that I thought the honest thing was to say so before the investment on both sides became something neither of us wanted to manage. He said, "Adele." I said, "I know this is unexpected. I am sorry." He said, "Is this what you actually feel?" I said, "Yes." There was a silence. He said, "All right, I will respect what you are telling me." His voice had something in it that I had to manage not to address. The specific quality of someone who has received information they do not believe, but who has too much dignity to say that they do not believe it. I said, "Thank you for these months. They were real and they were good." He said, "They were." I said, "Good night, Emil." He said, "Good night, Adele." I put the phone down and sat in the kitchen for a long time with my hands flat on the table, in the way my mother did when she was managing something she could not fix. I went to bed. I did not sleep. The following day, I opened the notebook, which I had not opened in 7 years, and I wrote in it for the first time since the day of the baccalaureate results. I wrote for 2 hours. I wrote everything. I wrote his name. Part 8, the treatment. My mother came to Paris for the treatment month. She stayed in the flat, sleeping in the second bedroom that I used as a study, and that she reorganized with the gentle efficiency of someone who needs to express love through the ordering of space into something more habitable. She cooked, and she managed the medical appointments, and she sat with me through the sessions in the specific, unfailing way that a person who loves you without condition sits with you through difficult things, which is simply by being there continuously, without requiring you to perform anything. I was not easy to care for. I want to be honest about this. The treatment did things to my concentration and my patience that were not my best qualities. The specific side effects of a treatment that targets rapidly dividing cells, which is all rapidly dividing cells, and not only the unwanted ones. I was short with my mother sometimes. I apologized. She said she had raised me and had some experience of my difficult moods and was not concerned. I worked when I could. The institute was generous, as institutes sometimes are when they have a researcher who is genuinely productive and who has given them several years of good work. I worked from home on the days when I could work, and I let the days when I could not work be days when I could not work, which required a form of self-permission that I found difficult and that I practiced with the specific deliberateness I applied to things I knew I needed to do. I wrote in the notebook. I wrote about the treatment and about my mother and about the city outside my window and about what I was thinking when I was thinking clearly and what I was not thinking when I was not. I wrote about the specific quality of the light in different seasons on the Buttes Chaumont, which I could see from the balcony and which I had been watching since I moved in. I wrote about things I wanted to have done and had not done. I wrote about things I was glad I had done. I wrote about Emil. I wrote about 3 years of the lycée and the bench in the park on the Rue du Temple and the coffee on the Rue de la Roquette and the concert at the Philharmonie and 5 months of evenings and the October light. I wrote about why I had ended it and what I hoped for him, not what I hoped he would do about me that was not mine to hope for, what I hoped for him in general, the specific quality of life I wanted for him, the specific person I thought he was, and what I thought that person deserved. I wrote, I hope he finds someone who is patient enough to let him arrive in his own time, and brave enough to say the thing plainly when the time comes. He was always worth saying the plain thing to. He listened. I wrote, I do not regret the 5 months. I do not regret the ending. I made the decisions I thought were right, and they were the best decisions available to me with the information I had. That is all you can do. There was a day in July when the treatment had been going for 4 months, and the world outside my window was doing the specific July thing, green and warm, and with the quality of being fully arrived, when I understood clearly that the trajectory was what it was. I called my mother into the room, and I told her about the notebook and where it was and what I wanted done with it. She listened. Then she said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes." She said, "It is a significant decision." I said, "I know. I have thought about it carefully." She said, "He may not be ready for it." I said, "He may not, but the choice should be his. I did not give him the choice when I should have, and I need to give it to him now." She held my hand for a while. She said, "You have always been a person who makes the right decisions at the cost of everything else." I said, "That is not necessarily a compliment." She said, "It is what it is. I love you for it." Part 9, the decision he did not know he had. There is something I need to tell you about Emile in the months after I ended the call in April. He did not accept the ending the way I had hoped he would accept it, which was as a finished thing that allowed him to move forward. He accepted it in the way he accepted most things completely in terms of action and not at all in terms of interior. He did not call me. He did not message. He respected what I had told him with the specific dignity of someone who has been told to stay away and who stays away. But he was present in my life in a form I had not anticipated. The research world in Paris is not large. The specific area of applied physics that I worked in had connections to the legal applications of certain material analyses that his firm occasionally required. We had not known this when we met because it had not been relevant then. It became relevant when a project his firm was working on required the kind of analysis my institute did. He emailed the institute, not me specifically, the institute. The email was fielded by my colleague Henri, who took the initial meeting and understood partway through it that the project was one that matched my specific area. Henri told me. I sat with this information for a day. Then I took the project. I want to be honest about why, not as self-deception. I took the project because it was the right project for my work and because I wanted to see him. And both of these things were true, and the second one was not disqualifying. The first meeting was in October, 6 months after the ending and 1 month after the start of my treatment. I was functional. The treatment was managing the symptoms and I was working. And the only visible consequence was a tiredness that I could mostly manage around the hours of professional meetings. He came to the institute. He sat across the conference table from me and Henri, and he was entirely professional, and so was I, and we both knew in the way that two people who have been in a room together for 5 months know when they are performing something rather than simply being in something that we were performing. After the meeting, as Henri went ahead to take a call, Emile stopped beside me in the corridor. He said, "Adele." I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you all right?" I said, "Yes. Why do you ask?" He said, "You look tired." I said, "I have been working hard." He said, "Is that all?" I looked at him. I said, "I am managing some health things, nothing that affects the project." He said, "I am not asking about the project." I said, "I know." We looked at each other in the corridor of my institute, in the specific fluorescent light of a corridor that was not designed for the kind of conversation we were having. He said, "Can we have dinner?" I said, "Emile, the situation between us is not different from what it was. He said, I know you believe that. I do not. I said, you should. He said, I would like the opportunity to demonstrate why I do not. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, dinner on Thursday. He said, Thursday. Part 10, what I told him. I told him on Thursday. At dinner in a restaurant near the Marais that we had been to together in the 5 months, one of the ones that had become in that time specifically ours, in the way that places become specifically yours, when you have been there enough times with one particular person that the place and the person have become associated in a way that is difficult to separate. I told him the way I told difficult things directly and completely, and without the softening that would have made it easier to say and harder to receive. I told him about the headaches and March and the specialist's office and the treatment and the trajectory. He listened without interrupting in the way he always listened, the complete reception without the management of his own response. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, why did you not tell me in April? I said, because I did not want you to stay out of obligation. He said, do you understand how that sounds? I said, yes, it sounds like I did not trust you. He said, yes. I said, I trusted you entirely. I did not trust the conditions. I wanted your choice to be free. He said, Adele, the choice was always free. I chose 5 months before April, and the choice was not revocable by the situation you were in. I said, I did not know that. He said, you should have trusted me to tell you. I said, I know, I am sorry. He looked at me across the table in the restaurant that was specifically ours. His face had the specific quality I had been reading since we were 17, the complete attention that received what was there without managing it. And what was there was something I found very difficult to look at directly. He said, I am not going to perform anything in response to this. I am not going to tell you it is going to be fine or that you will be all right or any of the things that people say when they need to do something with their own fear. I said, good. He said, what I am going to tell you is that the decision I made before April has not changed, and that I would like to be here for whatever is available. I said, Emile. He said, yes. I said, I ended it to protect you. He said, I know, it was wrong. I said, you are angry. He said, yes, not at you, at the situation, at the months I did not know. I said, I understand. He said, are you going to end it again? I thought about this. I said, no. He said, good. He reached across the table and took my hand. His hand was warm and completely certain, the hand of someone who has made a decision they have already made peace with. I looked at our hands on the table. I said, the trajectory is what it is. He said, I know. I said, I need you to understand that I am not asking you to sign up for something that ends the way this ends. He said, I understand exactly what I am signing up for. I said, Emile. He said, Adele, I noticed your hands on your bag on the day you told me you loved me when you were 17 years old. I have been noticing things about you for a long time. I have not stopped. I would like to continue. I looked at him. I said, all right. He said, all right. Epilogue, the notebook. This is no longer Adele's account. She could not finish it. What remains I am telling because she asked me to on an afternoon in late November, when the light was doing what light does in Paris in November, flat and honest, and without flattery. She asked me to tell the end because she wanted the record to be complete, and because she had always understood that a complete account required witness from the outside when the person inside could no longer provide it. My name is Vivienne Fontaine. I am Adele's mother. I have been in her flat near the Buttes Chaumont since July in the study bedroom. She converted for me tending her plants in the morning because she cannot tend them herself anymore and because she asked me to. The notebook is on the table beside her bed. She gave it to me in August and asked me to give it to Emile when the time came. She told me what was in it. She told me she had been writing in it since she was 14 years old, which I had not known, and that it contained things she had not been able to say out loud for most of her life, and that Emile deserved to have them. She also told me something else that I want to include because she wanted it included. She told me that the 5 months before April and the months since October, the total of time she has had with him, as genuinely him and her, genuinely her, have been the specific quality of time she had always hoped for, but had not believed was available to her. That the years of the notebook had been the years of a person who had not yet found the conditions in which she could be completely herself with the person she loved. That the conditions when they arrived had been what she needed them to be. She said, "Tell him that. Tell him the time was what I hoped it would be. Tell him I am not ending this time with regret about the time. The regret is about the timing, which is not the same thing. Emil is here most days. He comes in the morning and he works from the flat, in the corner of the sitting room, where she set up a desk in October, the specific, pragmatic solution of someone who has decided to organize her life for what is available rather than what should be. He eats dinner with us when she can eat. When she cannot, he sits beside her and reads. The specific presence of someone who has decided that being there is enough. He has not read the notebook yet. She told him it exists and that I will give it to him at the appropriate time. He said he understood. He was reading to her on the afternoon she told him a poem she had asked for, and he continued reading it after she told him, because the poem was what was needed in that moment and the notebook could wait. He will read it. When I give it to him, he will read it in the way he reads everything completely, and without managing his response. He will find 347 mentions of his name. He will find the entry from the day she told him she loved him, the entry that says I told him. He is with Isabeau. I smiled and I walked away and I was not embarrassed. I was proud of myself. That was enough. He will find the 7 years in between. He will find the October light and the concert and the 5 months and Thursday at dinner. He will find the last entry which she wrote in November in the specific, careful handwriting she had always had upright and clear, without being prissy, the handwriting of a person who respects the act of writing. The last entry says, I have been in love with you since I was 14 years old, and it has been the most constant thing in my life, not always the loudest or the most present, but the most constant. Like the morning light on the balcony, like the plants coming back in spring. I needed you to know, you always deserved to know. She signed it with her name. She signed it fully, first name and last, which she had never done in the notebook before. All the previous entries signed only with initials or not at all. She signed it fully because she wanted it to be officially and completely hers. It is, it was, it will always be. The plants on the balcony are still alive. I tend them every morning. The morning light falls on them and they grow toward it the way small things grow toward light. She asked me to keep them alive. I am keeping them alive. And She Is No Longer Here is an original dramatic narrative set in Paris, France. All characters, events, and institutions depicted herein are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead or to actual organizations or events is entirely coincidental. Additional chapter Isabeau. I want to tell you about Isabeau Girard because the full account requires her. She was the person who was everything I was not, or so I had decided at 17, with the specific and unfair logic of adolescent comparison. She was brilliant and beautiful, and she had the specific social fluency of someone for whom the world has always arranged itself cooperatively, who moves through spaces without effort, because she has been given the gifts that make most spaces accessible. I did not hate her. I want to be clear about this. Hatred requires the energy of someone who is invested in the destruction of the thing they hate, and I was never invested in her destruction. What I felt was closer to the specific exhaustion of knowing that you are competing with something you cannot match. The exhaustion of a race in which one person is simply faster and the result is known in advance. She and Emil were together for 5 years. I knew the shape of this from the intermittent information that makes its way through the networks of people who were in the same place once, and I received the information with the same practiced composure I received everything. What I understood from the brief and peripheral knowledge I had was that they were genuinely well suited in the ways that matter at 22. Both brilliant, both from professional families, both oriented toward the same kind of future. The relationship made the sense that certain relationships make when viewed from the outside, the sense of two people who belong in the same category. What I did not know was what it was like from the inside. This is the thing that categories do not capture, the specific interior quality of a relationship that cannot be assessed from the outside. I do not know what they were to each other. I know only that they separated at 27 in a way that Emile described as honest and as the conclusion of growth in different directions. And that description told me it was not a crisis but a reckoning. She was in Paris still. I knew this from the network. I saw her once after Emile and I had been seeing each other for 2 months at an exhibition opening in the Marais that a mutual acquaintance had invited us both to without knowing our respective connections. She came in with a group of friends and she saw me, and there was a moment, a brief, specific moment, in which both of us understood simultaneously what the other knew and had not been expecting to confront. She came over. She said hello. I said hello. We talked for 3 minutes about the exhibition with the specific politeness of two people who have a complicated mutual context and have decided in the moment to not engage with it. When she left, Emile, who had been talking to someone else across the room and who had not seen the exchange, came to find me. He said, "You look like you have been through something." I said I saw Isabeau. He said, "Ah." I said she was fine. We were both fine. He said, "Good." I said, "Emile." He said, "Yes." I said, "I do not need you to explain the 5 years." He said I was not going to explain them. I said, "Good." He said, "She is a good person. What we had was real, and what ended it was the specific thing that ends things when two people have been genuinely honest about what they are and where they are going. It is not a complicated story." I said, "I know." He said, "Are you all right?" I said, "Yes. I had prepared for this possibility and I am all right." He looked at me for a moment. He said, "You prepare for a great deal." I said, "Yes." He said, "I am beginning to understand why." We went home. It was the first time we had used the same home in that way, meaning his flat, and the fact of being in a space that was not neutral was its own form of arriving somewhere. I noticed his books and his specific organization of them, which was thematic rather than alphabetical, which told me things. I noticed his plants, which he also had a small grouping on the windowsill, less curated than mine, but alive and attended to. He made tea. We talked about the exhibition and about other things and did not return to Isabeau that evening, which was the correct choice. I drove home later and sat in my own flat and thought about the 5 years and about what it meant that the 5 years had ended and I was here. Not with triumph, with the specific and quietly styling quality of something you have not allowed yourself to imagine actually arriving. I wrote about this in the notebook. I wrote, "The 5 years are over and I am here." Not because of the 5 years ending, because of who I am, because of who he is, because we are both finally in the same place at the same time. I had not allowed myself to believe this was possible, and it is possible, and I do not know what to do with the possible except receive it carefully. I wrote, "I hope Isabeau is well. I mean this sincerely. I want her life to be what she wants it to be. She is not the obstacle I imagined her to be. She was simply a person who was in his life when I was not, which is all any of us are when we are not in each other's lives." That was true. I held it as such. Additional chapter, the plant on the windowsill. I want to tell you about a specific October morning because it was ordinary in a way that I think about most, the specific quality of ordinary things when you have been told they are numbered. It was a Sunday. The treatment was in its 3rd month. The specific effects of the 3rd month were real but manageable, the specific management of someone who has organized their life around the available functioning and has accepted the limitations without, as far as possible, living in them. Emile had stayed the night, not all nights, some. The arrangement between us was not architectural in the way of people who have been together for years and whose lives have merged at the structural level. It was provisional in the way of people who are building something carefully and are aware of the building. But some nights, and this Sunday morning was the morning after one of them. He was in the kitchen making coffee. I could hear him from the bedroom, the specific sounds of the kitchen, the kettle and the cupboard, and the specific particular sound of him navigating a space that was not entirely his, but that he had learnt well enough to move through without asking questions. I lay in the bed and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then I got up and went to the balcony. It was October, and it was cold enough to need my coat over my pajamas, and I stood on the balcony with the coat around me and looked at the Buttes-Chaumont hill in the distance, and the buildings between us and the hill, and the specific quality of Paris in October morning, the light that was arriving from the east and making the rooftops go briefly gold before it became the ordinary daylight. The plants were doing the autumn thing, the beginning of the drawing back, the concentration of life into the roots that will hold through the winter, not dead, preparing. He came to the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He looked at me on the balcony in my coat over my pajamas, and he did not say anything, just handed me the cup and stood beside me. We stood on the balcony and drank our coffee and watched the light change. He said after a while, "What are you thinking?" I said I was thinking about the plants. He said, "What about them?" I said, "About how they go in autumn, but they come back. The roots stay even when everything visible is gone. The roots are what you cannot see, and they are what holds." He was quiet. I said I wanted you to know that what has been between us is the root kind, not the visible part, the part that holds. He turned to look at me. I said I am not saying this because of the treatment. I am saying it because it is true, and it is October, and the light is doing this specific thing, and I am glad I am standing here. He reached over and took my free hand. His hand was warm and mine was cold from the morning and the coffee, and he held it in the specific way of someone who is not performing affection but simply holding a hand, because the hand is there and it is the right thing to do. We stood on the balcony. The light did its specific October thing. The plants prepared for winter. That was the morning I wrote about that night in the notebook, the entry that I titled simply Sunday Morning. I described everything I have described to you now in the specific, exact language I use when I am writing for myself rather than for anyone else. At the bottom of the entry, I wrote, "This is the version of my life I wanted. Not the full version, not the long version. The real version." Yes! Additional chapter, what he knew. After I ended the call in April, Emile did not call me. He did not call and he did not message, and he stayed away with the specific integrity of someone who has been asked to stay away and who does not argue with the asking, even when they believe the asking is wrong. He had learned, or he had always known, that there are specific forms of love that require you to do the difficult thing when the person you love is asking for it, even when you believe the asking is a mistake. But he did not accept it. He told me this later on one of the evenings in October after I told him. He told me that he had spent the months between April and October in the specific state of a person who has been told something that does not match what they know to be true, and who is therefore unable to close the account. He said, "I did not believe you when you told me in April that your feelings were not what you had hoped." I said I was lying. He said, "I know you were lying." I said, "How?" He said, "Because I had been watching you for 5 months, and I know the quality of your voice when you are saying something you believe, and the quality of your voice when you are not." The April call was the second quality. I said, "And you stayed away anyway." He said, "You asked me to. What I believe about your feelings does not override what you asked me to do." I said, "That is a specific form of respect." He said, "Yes." I said, "Most people would have pushed." He said, "I am not most people." I said, "No." He said, "I also knew that if there was something else happening, you would tell me when you were ready. You have always been a person who tells the truth when it matters." The April call was not the truth, but it had a specific form to it that told me a different truth was coming. I said, "What form?" He said, "You said the feelings were not evolving in the direction you had hoped. Not that they did not exist, not that you did not want to be with me, that the evolution was not what you hoped. That is a specific choice of language for someone who is ending something without a reason. It is the language of someone who has a reason they are not giving. I said I did not intend to be that specific. He said, I know. You do not always intend the specificity. It is just what you are. I sat with this. He said, I was prepared for you to come back and tell me something difficult. I did not know what, but I was prepared. I said, were you actually? He said, as prepared as a person can be for something they do not know the specific form of. I had made my peace with the fact that whatever came next was yours to determine and mine to receive. I said, that is also a specific form of love. He said, yes. We sat in the restaurant that was specifically ours, and I held the notebook in my lap which I had brought because I had decided to give it to him that evening and had then not been able to, and he did not know it was there. I gave it to him later, not that night. Several weeks later, when I had been through the conversation enough times in my mind to be certain that the giving was the right thing, rather than the frightening thing I sometimes confused with the right thing, he read it in a single sitting. He told me afterward that he had read it from the first entry to the last, the 3 years of the lycée, and the 7 years in between, and the months we had had, and that he had sat with it for a long time after he finished. He said, you counted to 347. I said, once, in the spring of the final year. He said, I did not know. I said, I know you did not know. He said, I am glad you counted. I said, why? He said, because it means you were paying the kind of attention to things that I was paying. You just wrote yours down and I kept mine somewhere else. I looked at him. He said I did not have a notebook, but I had a version of the same thing in my head. From before you told me on the day of the baccalaureate, not as long as yours, but present. I said, you are telling me this now. He said, you spent 17 years telling me things when the moment was right. I am telling you this when the moment is right. I said, it is a somewhat delayed moment. He said, yes, but it is the right one. I held this for a long time. Then I said, I am glad you told me. He said, I know, I could see it. The plants on my balcony were preparing for winter. The roots were holding. We held each other in the flat, near the Buttes Chaumont, in the specific warmth of a space that two people have made theirs through the daily accumulation of choosing to be in it together. That was the version of the life I wanted. Yes. Even at the cost of it. Yes. Additional chapter, the last good day. There was a day in late November that my mother calls the last good day, though she has said to me since that good is not quite the right word. She says full is closer. The last full day. It was a Saturday. The treatment was not working the way we had hoped, and the doctors had adjusted things in October, and the adjustment had produced a period of stability that everyone understood was not a resolution, but a pause. I was in the flat. The morning light was doing its specific November thing, coming in low and lasting only a few hours before the November dark reasserted itself. Emile came in the morning. My mother made the breakfast. We ate at the kitchen table, the three of us, with the specific domestic quality of people who have been sharing a space for long enough that the sharing is no longer something any of them is thinking about. My mother told a story about me as a child. Something about an incident at the market in Bordeaux when I was 6 years old, a specific and vivid incident that I had not thought about in years, but that when she told it, returned with complete specificity, the way certain childhood memories do when they are accessed from the outside. She told it with the gift she has for these things, the gift of someone who has paid attention to the life she was living and who can therefore describe it accurately. Emile listened with the complete attention he gave to everything. He asked questions. He wanted to know the 6-year-old version of me the way he wanted to know all the versions, the specific curiosity of someone who is interested in the person as a continuous project, rather than only in the person as she currently is. After breakfast, we sat in the sitting room. I was tired, but not the heavy tired, the manageable tired. And Emile read aloud for a while from the book I was currently in the middle of the specific position in the story, where the main character has just understood something that changes the whole of what came before. He read well. He had always read well. I remembered this from the lycée. The specific quality of a person for whom language is a genuine pleasure, and who therefore treats it with care. My mother eventually went out, an errand she had invented, I believe, to give us time alone, the specific tact of a person who knows when to be elsewhere. We sat in the sitting room in the November light. I was on the sofa, and he was in the chair across from me, and we were quiet, in the way of people who do not need to fill the space between them. He said, "Adele?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." I said, "I always answer honestly." He said, "Are you afraid?" I thought about this for a long time, not because I did not know the answer, because I wanted to give him the true answer rather than the managed one. I said, "Not of the end, of what I did not finish, the research. There are 2 projects that are at a point where they need someone to continue them, and I am not certain I have arranged that adequately." He said, "Is that all?" I said, "I am also afraid that my mother will not know what to do with the plants." He said, "I will tell her." I said, "You know about plants." He said, "I know about your plants. I have been watching you tend them since October." I said, "That is not the same as knowing about plants." He said, "I will learn." I looked at him in the November light. I said, "Emile." He said, "Yes." I said, "I am not afraid of being without you. I want you to know that." The specific anxiety I might have felt about leaving before we had this time has been resolved by having this time. The time has been what I needed it to be. He said, "Good." I said, "I am glad I told you when I was 17. He said, "So am I." I said, "I am glad I told you again." He said, "So am I." I said, "Even the timing." He said, "Even the timing." We were quiet in the November light. My mother came back with a bag of things from the market, the specific unnecessary things she buys when she needs to do something with her hands. She made soup. We ate the soup for dinner. It was good. She has always made good soup. After dinner, Emile did not leave. My mother made up his bed in the second bedroom, the one adjacent to mine, and she said good night, and went to her room, and he sat beside me for a while, in the sitting room in the evening quiet. He said, "The notebook." I said, "Yes." He said, "I want to tell you something about it." I said, "Tell me." He said, "The entry from the day of the baccalaureate. When you wrote, I told him I smiled, I walked away, I was proud of myself. That was enough." I said, "Yes." He said, "It was not enough. It should never have been enough. You deserved more than enough then, and you have deserved more than enough ever since, and I am sorry it took this long." I said, "Emile." He said, I know you are going to tell me that it is what it is and that you have made peace with the timeline, and I believe you have, but I needed to say it." I said, "I know." He said, "Thank you for the patience of it, for the 347 times and the 7 years and the April call and coming back when I asked. Thank you." I said, "You are welcome." He said, "Go to sleep." I said, "You are staying?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Good." I went to sleep in the flat near the Buttes Chaumont with the November dark outside and the plants on the balcony preparing for winter, and the man I had loved since I was 14 in the next room, and I slept well, which I had not always been able to do. That was the last full day. My mother is right that full is the better word. It was full of everything. Additional chapter Vivienne continues. This is Vivienne Fontaine again, Adele's mother. "I have been in this flat for months now. I am still here, not because I need to be, but because leaving does not feel possible yet. And leaving does not feel possible yet because the flat still feels like hers, which is the specific quality of a space that has been lived in by someone specific and that has not yet had time to become only itself again. The plants are alive. I tend them in the morning before I do anything else, because she asked me to, and because the tending is a form of continuing that is available to me. They are coming back from winter now. The small bulbs she planted in the autumn are beginning to show their first growth, the specific optimistic green of something that has decided the conditions are right to emerge. Emile is here often. He moved his things out of his flat in the 16th and has been looking for something closer, not here specifically, but in this arrondissement, the 19th, near the park. He has not said why, but I know why, and I have not asked him to explain it. He reads. He sits in her chair in the sitting room and he reads the books she had started and not finished working through them in the specific order she had them stacked, the order in which she had intended to read them. He has said when I asked that it feels like being in her reading, like being in the sequence of her attention. I gave him the notebook in December. He took it home and read it, and came back 3 days later and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and was quiet for a long time. I did not ask him to describe what he felt. He told me eventually one thing, which was this. He said she counted to 347. I said, I know. He said the patience of that, the specific daily patience of that. Writing it down every time rather than letting it become a background thing. Keeping the counting exact. I said she was always specific. He said, I know, I just did not know how early the specificity started. We sat with our tea. He said she wrote that the time we had was the version of her life she wanted. Not the full version, but the real one. I said, yes. He said, I want you to know it was mine too. He looked at the table. He said, I am going to be all right. I am telling you this not because you asked, but because I know she would have wanted me to tell you. She would have been worried about me. I said she was. She told me so. He said, tell me what she said. I told him. He listened with the complete attention he gave to everything sitting at my kitchen table with his tea in the flat that was hers and is mine now for a while, and will eventually be something else as all spaces eventually become something else. The plants are coming back from winter. She asked me to keep them alive. I am keeping them alive. She is no longer here. The things she made are still growing. That is enough. That is exactly enough.